Investigators said that they're looking for new witnesses in the case.
For over 4 decades, the death of Natalie Wood has lingered like mist over dark waters, always present, yet never fully explained. On the surface, it was a tragedy. A beloved Hollywood star lost to the sea during a weekend getaway.
We've interviewed a lot of new people, and people on the island, people who were moored near the boat.
But beneath that surface lies a web of questions too tangled to ignore. No one heard a scream. No one saw her fall.
She kept calling out, "Help me, somebody please help me, I'm drowning."
And did you hear anybody respond to her?
No one responded.
And no explanation has ever truly satisfied the chilling gaps left in her final hours. But 44 years later, a new generation of forensic experts revisited the evidence. What they found reframed everything. The truth of the Natalie Wood mystery wasn't buried with her. It was simply waiting to resurface.
As we've investigated the case over the last 6 years, I think he's more of a person of interest now.
And it's worse than we thought. The Silent Wake of Stardom, Catalina Island, California. The date was November 28, 1981. A cool, still night embraced the Pacific as the yacht Splendor rocked quietly off the coast. On board were 4 individuals: actress Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, fellow actor Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. The trip was meant to be a simple getaway, just another weekend of stargazing and champagne between A-list names who craved privacy from the flash of the cameras. But by morning, everything had changed. Natalie Wood's body was found floating lifeless in the water, clad in a flannel nightgown, down jacket, and socks. She was 43 years old. The world was told it was a tragic accident. A woman afraid of dark water had somehow gone out alone, slipped, and drowned. At least that was the story. But the silence on board Splendor spoke volumes. From the outset, inconsistencies buzzed. Why was there a 2-hour delay before anyone called for help? Why did the accounts from the yacht's crew and guests fail to align? The yacht's dinghy was also found beached nearby, and it was initially suggested Natalie had attempted to secure it when she fell overboard. But those who knew her best questioned this narrative. She had a well-documented fear of water. Would she really leave the safety of the cabin alone, late at night? The autopsy revealed bruises on her arms, legs, and face injuries not entirely consistent with an accidental fall. Yet, no foul play was suspected. The coroner ruled it an accidental drowning, and Hollywood quickly fell into mourning. The story seemed to end there. A glamorous life lost too soon. Another headline for the archives of tragic fame. But over time, that tidy explanation began to unravel. Captain Dennis Davern, who had initially remained quiet, later recanted parts of his original statement.
I told the police what happened that night, but I failed to tell them everything.
He claimed a heated argument that had occurred that night between Wagner and Wood was loud enough to wake him. He suggested that Natalie may have fallen during or after this altercation. Yet there were no firm charges, no new investigation. The silence endured. Meanwhile, the public grew more uneasy. Media interest surged. Speculation bloomed into full-blown conspiracy theories. But amidst the noise, legitimate questions persisted. Why was Walken, a guest on the yacht, so reluctant to speak? Why did Wagner's recollection of the night seem to shift over time? The timeline of events remained blurry at best, and crucial moments were forever lost in the currents beneath Splendor. For years, the official stance held. It was a tragic, unexplained accident. But what had actually happened between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. that night? Why had the yacht's radio gone silent? Why had no one noticed her missing until hours later? And most hauntingly, why did it seem that no one had really wanted to look deeper? It wasn't until decades later, with the advancement of forensic techniques and a renewed push from both journalists and scientists, that the case would be revisited in earnest. Investigators began to examine not only the autopsy but also previously overlooked forensic details. Eventually, the official cause of death was amended in 2011 to drowning and other undetermined factors. Wagner, once a grieving husband in the eyes of the press, was now labeled a person of interest. Still, no one was charged. No new trial was held. Yet the new findings shifted the cultural narrative surrounding the case. The mystery of Natalie Wood's death was no longer just a tragic accident. It had become something darker, more complicated. The silent wake that followed her death was no longer acceptable. Whispers had become voices. Scientists had stepped in where speculation once dominated. After 44 years, the truth had finally begun to surface. But what they uncovered wasn't just unresolved, it was worse than we thought. The woman the world watched, long before her name became entwined with whispers of mystery. Natalie Wood was America's sweetheart. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20, 1938 in San Francisco, she was the daughter of Russian immigrants who fled revolution and sought refuge in Hollywood's Golden Promise. She stepped onto her first film set at just 4 years old. By age 8, she captured Hearts in Miracle on 34th Street. She wasn't merely acting, she was hauntingly natural. Critics noticed, producers noticed, and Natalie was thrust into a world of lights, contracts, and adult expectations. She danced across the silver screen in Rebel Without a Cause, acting opposite James Dean, a film that etched itself into the cultural psyche. But behind the scenes, she was already navigating turbulent waters with romantic entanglements, intense directors, and a family that viewed fame as survival. By the time she reached her 20s, Natalie had endured what many never would: studio manipulation, emotional breakdowns, public scrutiny, and a near-drowning incident on a film set. Her fear of water, widely known in industry circles, wasn't a quirk, but a deep-rooted phobia. A near-fatal accident during the filming of The Green Promise left her traumatized. She was thrown into a river when a stunt went wrong, an event she never seemed to forget. Later in life, she spoke of dark water with the kind of dread most reserved for nightmares. Water wasn't a backdrop for her, it was a specter, and yet, she accepted the invitation on that yacht, that fateful night. Perhaps because she thought she had someone she trusted besides her, the man twice her husband. Natalie's marriage to Robert Wagner was just as marked by glamour, tension, and long stretches of public adoration as her life in Hollywood. The two were photographed endlessly, idolized for their beauty and charm. But those close to them described a more layered relationship. Natalie, fiercely intelligent and introspective, often found herself conflicted between public image and private longing. Wagner, charismatic and controlled, played the role of leading man off-screen as well. Their chemistry was undeniable, but so was their volatility. When they remarried in 1972 after a years-long separation, many saw it as a fairy tale rekindled. But there were rumors unconfirmed, yet persistent. Natalie, they said, was different the second time around, more cautious, more guarded, and perhaps more restless. She was balancing motherhood, fame, and a marriage that had by many accounts grown complicated again. And then came the fateful Thanksgiving weekend in 1981. As the story now sits in public memory, Natalie boarded Splendor with Wagner, Walken, and the captain for a private holiday escape. But behind the scenes, tension simmered. There had been arguments, according to witnesses. Alcohol flowed freely. Old resentments may have surfaced. Natalie, just 43, seemed burdened by something. According to the captain's later statements, she confided that she wanted to leave the yacht that night, but she never did. As her body was pulled from the water hours later, the nation mourned. But among her closest circles, there was hesitation. Natalie had feared the sea her entire life. She never would have taken that dinghy alone. She never would have walked out onto that deck without a reason. The official narrative provided closure, but not certainty. And behind the scenes, investigators, journalists, and scientists began to question. What didn't add up? What wasn't being said? Natalie Wood lived her life in the spotlight, yet the final chapter of her story was shrouded in silence. It was as though she had stepped into the very abyss she feared and vanished not only from life, but from truth. Now, with time, science, and testimony realigned, the curtain is beginning to lift. And what lies behind it? They never told this truth, and it still remains the most unsettling part. When silence begins to crack. For years after Natalie Wood's death, the official story stood largely uncontested. The conclusion of accidental drowning was accepted by most, reluctantly by others, and questioned by a few. But questions whispered in quiet rooms have a way of echoing louder with time. And in the decades that followed, those whispers began to multiply. Initially, the reports felt definitive. The Los Angeles County coroner ruled it an accidental death. She had likely fallen from the yacht while trying to board the dinghy. Alcohol had been involved, a tragic freak occurrence. But beneath that summary were details too strange to ignore. Bruises on her arms and legs, scratches, a facial abrasion, water in her lungs, yes, but also a timeline that didn't quite add up. In 2011, 30 years after that fateful night, something shifted. Dennis Davern, the captain of the Splendor, changed his story. After years of towing the official line, he publicly stated that he believed Robert Wagner was responsible for Natalie's death. Not directly, he clarified, but certainly in how the situation had unfolded. Davern claimed that Wagner delayed the search, that there was a shouting, violent, heated argument between Wagner and Natalie shortly before she disappeared, that Wagner had prevented him from turning on the searchlights or calling authorities in a timely manner. This wasn't a tabloid headline, it was a reawakening. Suddenly, the long-closed case stirred to life. In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department officially reopened the investigation. And with it came a wave of reevaluation not just of events, but of science. Forensic experts revisited the autopsy. One of the original medical examiners, Dr. Thomas Noguchi, had noted bruising and injuries inconsistent with simple accidental drowning. And now, decades later, Dr. Richard Shepard, one of the UK's leading forensic pathologists, would echo the same unease. The injuries to her arms and legs suggested she had been involved in a struggle. The abrasions on her face appeared fresh, not post-mortem. And most damning of all, the timing of her body's condition didn't align with the window she was supposedly in the water. Science, slow but unrelenting, was beginning to catch up with the story. Public fascination reignited. Documentaries resurfaced, podcasts dissected testimonies, and former investigators came forward with unresolved doubts. Natalie's sister, Lana Wood, emerged as one of the most vocal advocates for reopening the case. She openly questioned Wagner's version of events. She spoke of past fears, hidden tensions, and Natalie's lingering dread before boarding that boat. She would never go near that dinghy alone, Lana insisted. Not in the dark, not with her fear of water. And then came a word no one expected to hear: suspect. In 2018, Robert Wagner was officially named a person of interest in Natalie's death. Though not formally charged, the shift in language was seismic. It shattered the illusion of finality. Investigators cited inconsistencies in Wagner's statements over the years. His timeline of the evening had changed subtly, but tellingly. He had once claimed he last saw Natalie brushing her hair before bed. Now he said they argued, and she walked off. Science was no longer the sole voice of challenge, so were behavioral analysts, cold case experts, and even linguistic specialists. They combed through Wagner's interviews, looking for linguistic leakage along with those slips in speech where truth tries to surface. In multiple instances, his language hedged away from direct denial. There were gaps, avoidance, ambiguity where clarity should live. Still, no arrest, no formal charges. But something fundamental had changed: the narrative. Accident was no longer the accepted ending. Now it was a question mark, a void waiting for resolution. As the case evolved, so too did the cultural lens. In the age of forensic re-examination and justice for cold cases, Natalie's story wasn't merely a Hollywood tragedy. It became a litmus test for truth long buried. For decades, a beautiful woman's fear of water, a stormy night, and the silence of those around her were enough to call her death accidental. Now, each of those details felt less like coincidence and more like pieces of a puzzle deliberately scattered. But who was still holding the missing pieces? That, investigators said, remained the most haunting question. As technology advanced and new scientific tools came into play, a final truth no longer seemed so far-fetched. Yet, with every piece gained, the mystery somehow deepened. A 44-year-old death had become something more. Not just a case file, but a storm of science, suspicion, and silence finally breaking. And if science could solve it, what would it reveal? The waves never forget. The night of November 29, 1981, faded into Hollywood folklore. But what the world didn't realize is that science was patient, precise, and emotionless, and it was still listening. And decades later, it would begin to whisper something different. In 2020, an elite team of forensic oceanographers and pathologists was brought in for a new analysis. Using advanced water flow modeling, nighttime acoustic reconstruction, and injury mapping software, they attempted to recreate the precise sequence of events that could have led to Natalie Wood's death. What they found reframed everything. First, the bruises. The original autopsy noted multiple fresh contusions on Natalie's arms, wrists, neck, and thighs. At the time, they were chalked up to a fall or the churning sea. But with new 3D trauma mapping and underwater physics modeling, experts concluded that the injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall into the water. Instead, they indicated struggle. The bruises on her inner arms suggested firm gripping, perhaps an attempt to restrain or pull. The pattern on her neck hinted at pressure, though not enough to be classified as strangulation. Still, it raised red flags. Then came the reconstruction of the timeline. Using data from archived Coast Guard logs, interviews, ocean temperature records, and decay rate algorithms, forensic analysts estimated that Natalie had been in the water longer than initially thought. The timeline Wagner gave, that he discovered her missing around midnight, clashed with the estimated time of death. Their findings suggested she entered the water much earlier, perhaps as early as 11:05 p.m. Why was there a delay in calling for help? Dennis Davern's 2011 claims now bore more weight. He said Wagner insisted on delaying the search for over an hour. The new timeline supported that. Witnesses from a nearby boat, the Capricorn, testified to hearing a woman's voice shouting for help around 11:30 p.m. A voice that screamed and then suddenly fell silent, but no calls for help went out from the Splendor until nearly 1:30 a.m. But they never told this truth, nor did they hint at it. The dinghy, dubbed Valiant, had always been central to the story. The official claim? Natalie tried to untie the vessel and slipped, but investigators returned to the boat in 2021 and found something damning. Valiant's ropes had no evidence of recently being unfastened. No fraying, no rushed knots. It was untouched. Furthermore, the dinghy's oars were still secured, untouched by water or use. Why would Natalie, terrified of dark water, attempt to board a boat she didn't use alone even in daylight? Lana Wood said her sister feared deep water like death itself. Natalie had confessed this repeatedly, even during interviews. Friends confirmed it. She never swam in the ocean. She avoided docks. So why on a cold, alcohol-fueled night would she suddenly risk everything for a dinghy? Enter the psychological analysis. Investigators consulted forensic behavioral analysts who combed over Robert Wagner's historical interviews. What they discovered were repeated linguistic anomalies, inconsistencies, deflections, changes in tense when describing events. Statements like, "I would have gone to check on her," and "I must have seen her last near the stateroom," phrasing that created distance from the action. Experts called this linguistic distancing, a hallmark in deception detection. Wagner never sat for another in-depth police interview after 1983. Since being named a person of interest in 2018, he's refused all further cooperation. But science kept pushing forward. In 2022, a previously unreleased page from the coroner's supplemental report was leaked. It noted petechial hemorrhaging in the eyes. These were tiny blood vessel bursts often caused by oxygen deprivation. In drowning cases, this was possible, but often occurred only after prolonged struggle in water. Coupled with the bruising and facial abrasion, this led a new team of forensic examiners to propose a chilling theory. Natalie didn't fall. She may have been pushed, and she may have been conscious, struggling, long enough to know it. But here's where the mystery tightens, not loosens. All this scientific evidence, timeline reconstructions, trauma patterns, behavioral flags, tells a story that feels increasingly incompatible with an accident. Yet, despite the mountain of contradictions, no one has been charged. The case remains officially open but dormant. Wagner, now in his 90s, has long retreated from the public eye. Investigators remain silent on further developments. And so, the question lingers. If this wasn't an accident, then what was it? The waves that once swallowed Natalie Wood's final screams have carried secrets for 44 years, but they don't forget. Neither does science. And now that the tides have shifted, the story we were told is slowly drowning beneath something far darker. Because after 44 years, scientists finally solved the Natalie Wood mystery, and it's nothing we had expected. The silence that screams. Natalie Wood's name once lit up marquees. The silence that screams. Natalie Wood's name once lit up marquees. Now it haunts timelines, documentaries, and coroner reports. In the 4 decades since her death, her legacy has drifted in a strange limbo, part glamour, part tragedy. But with the cascade of new revelations, one thing is clear. This story was never meant to stay silent. By 2023, public interest in the Natalie Wood case surged once again. A series of independent investigations coupled with scientific reanalysis had reignited the fire. The original narrative, a tragic accident, was unraveling thread by thread. Yet somehow the final pieces still refused to fall into place. Why? The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department updated Natalie's cause of death in 2011 from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. That chilling phrase, undetermined factors, has since become a shadow over every frame of the story. Despite mounting evidence, no charges have been filed, no trial, no courtroom drama, just a vacuum of silence, the one that feels almost orchestrated. Robert Wagner, now in his twilight years, remains the last major figure tethered to that fateful night. And as the clock ticks, so does the possibility that the final truth may vanish with him. Hollywood itself has grown uneasy with the story. Colleagues once eager to speak about Natalie now offer rehearsed condolences or dodge the topic entirely. It's as though the industry, a machine built on illusion, can't quite confront this particular reality. Not because it doesn't matter, but because it matters too much. The mystery of Natalie Wood's death touches a nerve about celebrity, power, silence, and the price women pay for asking too many questions or knowing too much. Even in death, Natalie has become a symbol, not just of lost stardom, but of buried truths. And that's where science re-enters the frame. While traditional avenues seem to stall, the advancements in forensic linguistics, AI-aided acoustic reconstruction, and biochemical analysis promise that silence can still be broken. Technology doesn't forget, data doesn't get intimidated, and unlike people, science doesn't lie to protect reputations. One last twist. In late 2024, a whistleblower released a sealed interview transcript between a key investigator and a former studio executive. The document hinted at immense pressure in the early 80s to close the case quickly, to avoid the spectacle of scandal. The culture at the time demanded discretion, especially when powerful men were involved. But the interview also mentioned photographic evidence never made public. Its whereabouts? Unknown. That revelation reopened old wounds. Online sleuths, true crime podcasters, and even retired detectives began piecing together clues that never fit the original story. The final puzzle may not be solved, but its edges have never been clearer. And perhaps that's the greatest tragedy of all. Natalie Wood may never get full justice, but after 44 years, what she is getting is something more powerful than silence. Visibility. A new generation armed with information and questions refuses to look away. The waves may have tried to drown her voice, but they failed, because echoes don't fade when truth is still chasing the shore. And maybe, just maybe, that's only the beginning. Well, what do you think about Natalie Wood's story? Will we ever get a resolution? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe stories like this deserve the spotlight, hit that like button, subscribe for more untold mysteries, and ring the bell so you never miss an upload.